Hello, my name is Danny. I'm a third-year student in the Creative Media Division. I'm tackling the film Ringu, directed by Hideo Nakata for my final project of Japan: A Cinematic Journey. Hideo Nakata was born in Okayama, Japan in 1961. He began his career creating pinku films, which are Japanese erotica films, before taking his knowledge into the world of horror. He is known for movies like Dark Waters, The Ring, Curse, Death, and Spirit, and his most recent film, Sadako. Ringu took home the prize for the Japan Academy Prize of Popularity Award for the most popular film in 1999. Ringu follows the story of Riku, a newspaper journalist working on a story regarding a cursed videotape that kills whoever watches it 7 days later. Riko's niece is killed unexpectedly on the same day as many of her friends, and it is rumored that they watched the video on their weekend trips to Izu Pacific Land. Putting two and two together, Riko travels to the cabin where the kids stayed and watched the film, finding it and also watching it for herself and thus continuing the curse. Riku must find a way to stop the curse from killing her and her family, who has now seen the film after she showed it to her ex-husband, Riju, and after her son got a hold of it by accident. Ringu was based on a novel of the same name written by Koji Suzuki. It took place in modern Japan, based on the story of Okiku and Himji's castle. Himji's castle, located in western Japan, is home to Okiku's well. This well holds the body of the servant Okiku. She was framed by a samurai after she didn't accept his romantic advances and was blamed for stealing. Instead of enduring the torture and execution, she took her own life and threw herself down the well. It was said that the samurai would see Okiku's ghost crawl out of the well in the middle of the night and terrorize him soon after the events. According to an article written by Dieter Wans-Kurza, the many versions of Okiku are normally depicted on woodblock paintings. These are somewhat similar to comic strips, where images tell a story in some way, shape, or form, and these paintings are sold all over the world, ranging from $50 to an upwards of $1,000. While reading the other versions of the Okiku ghost stories, the overall theme of each holds the tragic and wrongful death either by the hands of Okiku herself or by someone else. For my project, I wanted to ask the question of what made Ringu, this supernatural story about a cursed videotape, so popular, so scary, and so impactful on the J-horror genre as a whole by creating the beginning of this horror boom, and how did it become the highest grossing horror film in Japan even during their economic depression of the 1990s? A super important part to understanding how Ringu did so well in Japan is knowing the difference between horror in Japanese culture and horror in Western culture. The easiest way I can explain the two genres is a quote from a film comment article written by Alvin Liu. Quote, Ringu is to Japan what The Exorcist is to America. There are many different types of subgenre horror movies: psychological horror like Silence of the Lambs and The Shining, found footage like Blair Witch, supernatural like The Ring and Nightmare on Elm Street, and creature and alien horror like The Thing, Alien, or Mama, just to name a few. There are so many different subgenres of horror, which is why I think it's one of my most favorite genres of entertainment. There's just a variety of different kinds of films that can be created. Western horror films are unsettling films designed to frighten and panic, cause dread and alarm, and to invoke our hidden worst fears, often in a terrifying, shocking finale, all while captivating and entertaining us at the same time in a cathartic experience. These films also have a variety of main characters in gender, race, and sexual orientation. J-horror, however, was mainly created on a teenage girl-based genre. What I mean by that is female protagonists and antagonists like Sadako and Riku are more prevalent. For example, the film Occult, when we watched it in class, there was a female interviewer who played a pretty important role during the film, even though she died at the end, and many other famous examples of J-horror like Ju-on and Darkwater. I think the knowledge of Nikita's starting off point with Pinku films played a huge part in his passive role of bringing J-horror more into light. Something that sets Japanese horror apart from Western, in my opinion, is the slow buildup of fear throughout the films before their final acts. I believe this is what makes J-horror movies so much scarier than Western horror, and why I prefer foreign over American any day. It really gets the blood pumping. Now that we know a little bit more about the background of the genre, the next important thing to consider is the time period in which the film was released. According to an essay written by Edward Prescott and Fumiko Hayashi, the 1990s was known as the lost decade in Japan. This decline in the economy was due to multiple problems with production rates, growth rates, productivity rates, and specifically the reduction of the workweek times. Between 1988 and 1993, the Labor Standards Law decreased the workweek from 44 hours to 40 hours, which is a typical workweek for full-time workers in America. A quote from the article says, "The shortening of a workweek shifts the level of the steady-state growth path down." So, basically, the less time you work, the less stuff you make, the less stuff you make, the less money you make. It just kind of shows that the level of work mentality decreases over time as the work week moves. So decreasing the work week by 4 hours in theory should have made workers more excited to keep working, but instead had a completely opposite result. I personally don't believe that lowering the work week by 4 hours contributed so harshly to the economic decline, but I can see how people are leaning towards this as the answer. Less hours worked means less production, less income, less profit in the long run. This also makes Ringu a strange case of success, since it brought in nearly 49 million US dollars worldwide, despite the decline of the economy at the time. This made Ringu the highest grossing J-horror film during this time period, and thus began the horror boom. Filmmakers saw its success and wanted to follow it. What better way to get the crippling decline of the economy off your mind than a horror movie? I truly believe this movie came at the perfect time. It offered an escape from reality while giving people something else to worry about or fear other than the state of their worlds, which is something we need right now in the world of COVID and the election, but I digress. Aside from the horror genre and aside from the time period, family dynamics play a huge role in the advancement of this film. Riku starts her investigation after her niece Oshi dies unexpectedly, watches the film with her ex-husband, and eventually has the film trickle down to her son. Riku now has to do anything and everything in order to stop the curse from getting her family, no matter the cost. While it may not seem strange to us with our views on family dynamics in Western culture, it is uncommon to have a family unit split as vastly as our main characters. An article from the University of Pittsburgh writes, "What is still common in Japan are 3, 4, and occasionally even 5-generation households." While this may also be the case for some American family dynamics, the traditional nuclear family in America consists of a husband and wife and 2 children. Think Nuketown, for example. In contrast with traditional beliefs, Riku and Yoshi live alone together in central Japan, which is already far from the norms of the traditional Japanese family. Since the Japanese nuclear family consists of so many generations of members living together under the same roof at the same time, why do we only see Riku and Yoshi together? We do see the grandfather pretty early on in the film, and then again when Riku drops Yoshi off at his house. He lives by himself in a large home, and I can't really say much about how this differs from the nuclear family dynamics, since the grandfather seems to be doing pretty well on his own. It is important to note that older family members do not need to be living in the same house all the time. It is custom for the family to move into the home of the older generation after they can no longer care for themselves on their own, unlike what you see in Western culture when some families send older people into old folks' homes or have them move into their own house. It is possible that the grandfather in this film has not reached this point in life yet and can still live on his own without a problem. Living alone in the 1990s was not something that was very common, and I believe this played with the fear of being alone, losing a loved one, or having no one to be with you in times of need. I, for one, could see how this would be scary, especially during the time of economic crisis and uncertainty they were going through. In Japanese culture, family is one of the most important aspects of life. It even stays important to them after death. Instead of in Western culture, where we bury our ancestors and visit their graves, the Japanese traditionally have an altar of some sorts in their homes or a family temple close by. This is much like having a memorial for past family members in the home, but day to day life. Ritual attention is important, as we have seen in movies like Rent-A-Cat, when the main character offers food, drink, items, and even cats to her grandmother's altar. I think this is to help the living family members remain in contact and connected with their loved ones who have passed on. And this is something that we see in many other films around the world. The dead and the afterlife are a huge part of the Japanese family dynamics in everyday life. They believe in spirits, ghosts, and some folk stories, depending on who you ask. With all of this in mind, it's interesting to rewatch the film knowing the impact that supernatural forces have on Japanese citizens as a whole and how our main character deals with this knowledge. Ringu at its core is a supernatural J-horror film, in which the cursed tape holds supernatural abilities to kill the viewer due to the vengeful spirit of Sadako, our main villain, who was thrown down a well by her father after he learned of her supernatural abilities, and she survived in the well for 7 days before succumbing to death. Not only does the spirit in the film possess supernatural abilities in her life before and after death, it is implied that the ex-husband, Riju, possesses some form of supernatural ability to view memories by touch, specifically seen when he comes in contact with the victim's grandfather and receives a flashback into the moment Sadako claims her first victim. Knowing the Japanese connection to the afterlife and belief in ghosts and spirits, I found it interesting that Riko didn't immediately accept her son's claims when he told her about the cursed video. I do understand that he is a child with a wild imagination, and it can be assumed that this is the way that he's grieving the loss of his cousin. But even then, I don't understand why Riku wasn't interested in how he knew that information in the first place. Upon her further questioning, Yoshi only responds with, "She told me to." At what point does belief switch to superstition? Riku traveled to the camp, found the film, and still sat down and watched it, even after all of the supernatural signs of something being wrong, like her son's warning, the strange photos of the four deceased friends, and all of her research and interviews on the film up to this point, and all of the sudden deaths of her niece and their friends. Riku basically shrugs her shoulders and watches the film anyway, and to me, this was like seeing someone practicing Satanism in a Catholic church. It was just absurd. Taking this even further, why were her next steps to take the tape to her ex-husband and show him even after knowing all of this curse information to be true? I feel like this is one of the only things that doesn't make sense in the film. The decisions of the main character in regards to the supernatural. She can obviously see that something isn't quite right with the constant signs she receives from her family, outside sources like the innkeep, and the ability to literally not watch the film, or take the film to someone else for that matter. Spoilers for the ending of the film in this section here, just heads up. In the end, when Riku discovers that Riju was killed even after putting Sadako to rest, with the help of a spirit, she realizes in order to save her son, she needs to get her son to make a copy of the video and show it to someone else. So, logically, who does she choose? The grandfather. This literally blew my mind. If family means so much to them, I can understand wanting to save everyone in the family, especially your kid, but at the cost of your own father? Unless, of course, the father then has to go and show it to someone else, but then it's just continuing the cycle. She should have just left the damn tape alone in the first place. I understand why she didn't, though, because then we wouldn't have a movie. But still. And with that, this is a perfect segue into my next idea: trauma! In regards to Ringu, the childhood trauma is ever present throughout both sides of the story. Riku's son lived through the divorce and the eventual death of his biological father, and Sadako was killed by her father after discovering her uncontrolled powers to kill a human being with the blink of an eye. This trauma, this violent death of being trapped in a well, forced Sadako to seek spiritual revenge on anyone who wronged her, and since no one came to her aid, and everyone was under the belief that she was some sort of monster while she was undergoing tests with her mother, everyone wronged her. Even upon finding her remains in the well, she isn't put to rest. She will not rest until everyone in the world pays, or everyone who gets involved pays. Quote, Ringu depicts trauma that has lost a chance to properly be recognized, but having been buried, comes back to life in the form of a revenging ghost whose life is linked with that of a divorced woman who is a single mother. It's almost like the characters in this story are feeding off of each other's misfortunes in an attempt to get ahead. Sadako keeps the upper hand after killing Oshi in the beginning of the film. Then, once the mother gets involved, the spirit takes her revenge out on her son Yoshi by making him watch the film, by manipulating him to think that, quote, Ochi made me do it. This implies that Sadako used the spirit of Oshi to make him watch the film and further ruin their lives of the protagonist's family. This plays into the family dynamic section I talked about in regards to the destruction of the nuclear family as a whole. When there's a wrongful death or tragedy, it messes with the family, as it would anyone. This story and the events that occur throughout the film deal with tragedy of a family being ripped apart by death, on both sides. While there are the underlying Japanese ideals of worshipping past ancestors and family members, the fear of losing the nuclear family dynamics runs through everyone, not in just Japanese culture. I believe the fear of the film is not just the monster we see coming out of the well and the creepy video that we get to watch, but the fear of what the aftermath is, the calm after the storm. In the very beginning of the film, when we see the two girls joking around before being scared and eventually killed, while I watched it, I was just more afraid for the aftermath when Ochi was found. I fear the moment the family knows someone has been taken from them, more than the act of being taken itself. In conclusion, I think Ringu was impactful during the 1990s economic depression because of the fear of the changing times. Nuclear family dynamics have changed drastically. Even in today's society, we don't see many people getting married or having children other than pets. And we know how hard it is to lose a family member in any way, especially such a harsh way like an unexpected or wrongful death. The perfect time for the movie to come out was during some kind of crisis to get your mind so citizens could get their mind off of whatever crisis was happening at the time. The fear of the unknown is just pressing further into the fear of the nuclear dynamics changing. Childhood trauma affects how that child and others grow up around them. Making irrational decisions in order to protect the ones you love sometimes can have the most fearful outcomes. For example, the ending of the film, when Riku decides that she's going to save her son's life by putting her father's life at risk, which then spreads the film like wildfire. So, yeah, that was my analysis of the 1998 film Ringu by Hideo Nakata, based on the novel of the same name. Here are links to my image sources and my works cited, and let me know what you guys think about it. Let me know if there's other questions that you want to delve deeper into, or any issues or any conflicts you see with any of um, my ideas for this. And I look forward to hearing your comments. Thanks.